ability of the central bank to supply forex is increasing, going by the movements in the reserves, the improvements in the reserves, and it will get better in 2018. So I do think that 305 is a very cautious assumption. You might see a Naira exchange rate stronger than 305 in 2018.
How do you expect the financing of the deficit in this budget to go? Because already this budget will be borrowing 1.7 trillion.
Right. It would not have been, my preference. I do not think that the government should borrow more. I do think that the government should look for sources of revenue, non-tax, non-debt revenue sources.
For instance?
Yeah, the government has a lot of assets that are idle that you could unlock liquidity from. Yes, for the first time, some decent amount is expected from privatization. Some decent amount is expected from restructuring of government holdings in joint ventures. But I think that Nigeria could unlock much more from government assets. And Saudi Arabia, for example, is looking for $200 billion US by privatizing, partial privatization across 16 sectors. Saudi economy, non-economy, is much smaller than the Nigerian economy. So if Saudi is ambitiously looking for $200 billion US from its assets, Nigeria can get much more. So if we
what kind of assets do we have, do you think, that has that value?
That has that value. If I give you a very simple example, the UK government relocated a female prison from a high-income district to a low-income district, and used part of the old prison will now be used to build luxury apartments. Now, you also have prisons in high-income districts that fetch you no money, that could fetch you trillions of naira. You have barracks, in Ikoyi, in VI, your prisons are, So you too could do that. That's the point I'm saying, that you could look towards, unlocking liquidity from your assets. And much of the barracks that we have now were ideal military locations originally. Right now they've been encroached, by urban congestion. They're no longer ideal for barracks. You could, the money you realize from relocating them, you use maybe 5% of them to build ultra-modern, ideal, new military locations, and free, those assets currently occupied by them, for, getting revenue into the forest. It's just an illustration. Then Saudi has 40 million people. Nigeria has 4 times as much, nearly 5 times as much. The payoffs to privatizing infrastructure in Nigeria will be many times, better than the payoffs to privatization in Saudi Arabia. You can't connect 160 million telephone lines in Saudi Arabia. They simply don't have that population. So if you were to privatize power transmission, if you were to privatize rail, if you were to privatize pipelines, if you were to privatize health institutions, many of our national hospitals, with weak capacity for diagnosis, Saudi is privatizing the King Faisal Hospital. Saudi is privatizing its universities, they said the buildings. They are privatizing their football clubs. We have, stadiums spread across the country that are overgrown with grass. So we have opportunity to unlock revenue from assets, which we are not exploiting. Yes, income has fallen, and we've been trying to use debt. You see, you use debt to meet up temporary income shortfalls. When you have a permanent shortfall in income, you shouldn't be using debt. You shouldn't be, looking at the liability side of your balance sheet. You should be looking at the asset side of your balance sheet. And Nigeria is very rich in assets which are idle. It's not just the federal government that has assets that are idle. All states, that have been, getting bailouts have assets that are idle that they can look to and unlock liquidity and revenue from.
That speaks to the question of state governments being able to look inwards to increase their own IGRs. Do you think that with this budget, states will have more zeal to do that?
Well, this budget is not proposing any fundamental change. It's still going to be
business as usual.
Sorry?
Is it still going to be business as usual?
Well, no, I'm not. It's still going to be basically mainly oil revenue, then a bit of non-oil, a bit of borrowing. We are not. Yes, there's some mention of restructuring, joint venture, privatization. I do think that you need a major change in emphasis, from letting the private sector do more, from opening the room more broadly for investment, funding capital spending by investment, which is what privatization allows you to do, rather than hoping to fund much of the capital spending from the budget, which our experience in the last couple of years is that we make huge capital spending plans and we implement maybe less than half of it. And it's not going to be different for 2017. There's no reason why you should expect it to be different in 2018. The improvements in revenues, that we've been in a situation where we've been borrowing like 4 times as much as we've been spending on capital projects, which means we've been borrowing to meet recurrent items. So improved revenue might mean that we'll have enough for the current spending, but does not guarantee that you have enough to meet the capital projections. So you would want a situation where the budget reflects the reality that government may not be able to find enough money for capital spending, and therefore creates more room for investors
to come
to do more on the capital side of things.
Look at what we have. Our power sector having about an allocation of 555 billion, and then next is transportation, 263 billion. These two sectors work hand in hand to an extent. How much of their collaboration do you think will come into bear to be able to deliver on industrial development?
Right. The budget, the capital votes, are intentions. The reality is about how much of that intention will be actualized. This is not the first year that works, power and housing is getting the lion's share of the allocations, but how much of it gets funded, that's realism. You can want to spend more than $500 billion on power, you may want to spend, $250 billion on transportation. How much revenue will you actually find in the course of 2018? That's the real issue. And that's why perhaps I would encourage that more of this capital spending be left to investors.
Dr. Ayateriba, I want to thank you so much indeed, CEO, Economic Associates, for talking to us on this very interesting topic of the release of the 2018 budget.
Thank you.
Many thanks indeed for talking to us. Thanks. Sunrise Daily will be back after these messages. Join us again.